So we're coming to the part now where we'll have our panel discussion, and I'd like to invite our speakers onto the stage. We'll clear away the lectern and begin the panel discussion now. So once again, I'd like you to thank our speakers, Ian Stewart, Nick Allen, Lea Waters, Neil Levy and Garang Dutt, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just go through their propositions, which we'll be voting on later on as well, while we're getting set up, ladies and gentlemen. Ian's proposition was that Australian schools should teach atomic theory to primary students to future-proof our nation. Nick Allen's proposition is that we must offer direct support to stressed families and entire neighbourhoods to improve children's health and well-being across their lifespan. Lee's proposition was all Australian schools need a well-being curriculum that boosts positive mental health in students. Neil's was we need to place much more emphasis on developing the self-control of children than we do right now. And finally, Garang's was we must embrace Australian multiculturalism. They're all there now. I'll get started. Of course, if you have that question, use the Twitter hashtag UOMFOI, and they'll go down to Liam here. There's a microphone being circulated around as well. Put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. The mic will be passed to you, and we'll take your questions as part of the panel discussion. I might start with you, Ian. As I was thinking, hearing you quote Richard Feynman there saying that atomic theory is the most important, perhaps, of all the sciences, I was thinking if Richard Dawkins is watching this over the live stream, he'd be choking on his cornflakes right now. He'd be saying, oh, no, natural selection. It'd be natural selection, man. Why would you say atomic theory rather than natural selection would be a better thing to teach these young kids?
Yeah, good question. I'm looking at it from the point of view of pedagogy, I suppose. In terms of building a mastery of science over time, this is the one they should learn first, and then natural selection is something that they can learn downstream. Actually, I think also perhaps we could include Newton's 3 laws in there as well. But to simplify it, I think we should have a hierarchy of a learning progression rather than just throw it all at them.
It's funny you say that, because I tend to find with scientists, they tend to think of their discipline as the primary discipline and everyone else has got to fall under, become branches on their tree.
I was expecting to offend a lot of people.
Well, that's the whole idea, is it? Is it easier to teach something like atomic theory rather than natural selection to young kids?
Well, I'm actually a physics and chemistry teacher, so I would say that, wouldn't I? But yes, it's more, because it underlies all of the other sciences, in my opinion, then kids can actually get a unified view of science, that they can actually migrate around the various disciplines and there's some kind of map that they can follow.
A map of reality.
Yeah, well, a map. It's like there's a lot of hierarchical trees in the way that we navigate computers, for example. It's much the same. I think it's the way that our human brain is wired up, actually, to organise things, concepts, hierarchically. And this is to me, it's really an obvious way to go.
I just realised I've been neglectful. I haven't introduced Ben McKenzie here, science comedian, writer and actor. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ben as part of our panel. I notice, Nick, part of your work involves the issue of sleep with adolescents. Why is it so hard to change school hours at the moment? They don't reflect the working lives of the parents. Clearly, we know teenagers need to sleep in. That's what everything about their body is telling. There's a lot of research that backs that up, isn't there? Why do we still have these school hours based on this idea that teenagers wake up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the morning, and there's a stay-at-home parent every day to pick the kids up from school?
Well, I think actually the reason is because the current school hours do suit parents, and that's what they're designed around. They're designed around parents' working schedules. But as you say, we know that there is a biological shift with teenagers, that they actually want to sleep later and wake up later. That's also now exacerbated by the use of social media, which is a new phenomenon where your peer group is available to you now almost 24/7. And so kids are staying up later on social media. And so we have two phenomena that are problematic in adolescent sleep. One is that they get into sleep debt during the week because they stay up late, but they still have to get up early to go to school. And then what happens is they compensate for that on the weekend by sleeping in very late. And then what happens on Monday morning, they've essentially got jet lag. And that happens week after week for adolescents. And this is not just a matter of being sleepy. We know it affects mood, it affects learning at school, it affects mental health and a whole lot of things. So sleep patterns, kids who tend to go to bed later and get up later are at higher risk for mental health problems. So, but you put your finger on it, there's a lot of discussion about whether there should be policy changes to things like school starting hours.
Hasn't it changed in Scandinavia, parts of Scandinavia? I think they have different school hours there in recognition of this very real issue.
Yeah, it's a bigger issue in the United States. They tend to have earlier school starting times in high school than even we do. But I think the reason for resistance is because parents say, well, I've got to get to work.
It's not just parents, it's employees, it's industry. I mean, if you think about the way that we understand schools, the way that we were all schooled, it's actually quite a new phenomenon, the post-industrial school. And it's based on a factory model, which, you know, you go to school at the same time as your parents go to the factory, and the factory opens at 8 o'clock in the morning, and your parents mass produce a good, and the school mass produces knowledge, and at 5 o'clock everyone finishes. There's a legacy to it that is actually reasonably new, and we should start to question these things a lot more often, I think. I mean, in education now we've got the idea of flip learning, which is having shorter time at school and then using technology and Skype to learn outside of school. And Garang, you were just doing that automatically anyway, just through your own resilience and proactiveness. But these things are starting to be questioned in terms of, do we have to actually go to school? To what degree do we have to go to school to learn? And to what degree do we have to learn with people who are the same age as us, but actually developmentally or intellectually may be 2 years in advance of us in terms of their mathematics knowledge, but a year below in terms of their geography. So I think we need to throw all of those things up and question, not just the hours, but the way in which we learn and the cohort effects in which we learn and the role of the teacher. And especially, you know, speaking to Richard's point, you know, why do we put these age and stage relationships that constrain what we're able to learn?
I think the answer to these questions is that we don't know. And we really just need to do a lot of research and trialling in different modelling of different ways that could happen in order to get the answers, to try and get good answers to those questions.
Neil, you mentioned, I think it's pretty indisputable, the benefits of teaching children and adolescents self-control. How can you teach, though, that to high school students without involving torture as part of the process?
Well, you can give people rewards that they have to exercise self-control to get. But, you know, self-control is something that you don't... one of the reasons why it sounds so Victorian in the pejorative sense to say is we should be teaching self-control is we think of self-control as about saying no. It's about, you know, not having that second drink. It's not having that piece of cake. It's not continuing to lie in bed and rather going for a jog or whatever it is. But it doesn't have to be like that. The same systems that are involved in that kind of process are also involved in focusing attention. So practicing the piano, reading a book while you're automatically, as well as effectively, as psychologists say, filtering out distractions. That's all exercising the same set of systems. So that can be enjoyable. You know, there are going to be different things that different kids, different teenagers find enjoyable, which will actually require them to develop those capacities.
So you need the second marshmallow, in other words.
Yeah, and that the marshmallow for some is going to be playing the piano. For some, it's going to be a sport. You know, a lot of kids want to be, who we don't think of as academic, want to be good at sport. Now, to really be good, they've got to practice, and that actually requires focus. It requires attention. It requires delay of gratification. It requires self-control.
Gary, I've got a question for you. As it happens, on my way to the airport, on the way to this thing, my taxi driver was a refugee from Rwanda, and it was a long drive to the airport, so I got his story. I'm going to have him on my show. He was so interesting and charismatic. This is a guy whose family had been murdered in front of him. He'd spent years in refugee camps in Uganda, Kenya and Ethiopia, and met his wife in Ethiopia, came to Australia. He's got a couple of kids, is doing a Bachelor of Nursing, driving a taxi to pay for it. And he said to me, this is apropos to nothing at all in the back of the cab. He said, you know, the difference between here and life in Africa for me is that, yes, here it's more peaceful, here it's safer, but it's so much more stressful.
Yes.
Does that ring any bells with you?
Yes, I think it's consistent with what most people would find or would experience if they come from such background, because the settings and how the society is operating vary a little bit. And that's why I try to emphasize the issue of attitudes of people against or towards each other. Because regardless of the resourcing, in the end it comes down to how people interact. While in African setting, and most of those refugee camps, they don't have a lot of resources, whenever you have a diversity that you're experiencing on your own, there's that communal effect of families sticking together, and you always know your neighbor. When I resettled in Australia, I spent quite a long time without finding out who my neighbors were, because you find the doors shut most of the time. And if you go to many of the African communities, you would actually find that doors are usually open if someone is home. You only shut the door when there's no one in the house. And you're always welcome to peep over, talk to your neighbor, know who they are, and everyone tends to know everyone in the neighborhood. And so you sort of have that background of people always there to help.
Australia was like that about 30, 40 years ago, I think, too. That's the other thing. This is a recent thing in Australia, that doors are closed when people are home.
That's probably what we need to go back to now.
Probably, yeah. Liam's got a question via Twitter.
Yeah, so there was a theme in a number of the speeches and on the Twitter feed talking about, you know, we've heard about all this new mental illness. Is this more diagnoses, or is it a new problem? There's also been a lot of talk about the importance of having young people overcome adversity in their lives. We have a question from Twitter user Rob Baker asking, is there a relationship between a nation's affluence and the rise in depression amongst our youth? And is life just too easy nowadays?
Who wants to take that one? Go on.
There does seem to be some... it's a complicated question. All right, that's the short answer. The way I think about it is this. I think that what we do in culture is we provide people with guidelines and ways in which to express distress. And I think that in our culture and similar cultures, we have the typical symptoms of depression, as we see them, say, in the psychiatric or psychological sense, are one of the well-established ways to express distress, and people go there. Now, so if you take those particular symptoms and then apply them in different cultures and different sorts of societies, you may not see the same prevalence, but you may see prevalence of different kinds of things. For example, one of the cross-cultural phenomena that people have talked about with depression is that in many developing nations, people will talk about, they will somatise psychological distress. They'll talk about it in terms of pain or in terms of physical dysfunction. That if you talk to someone who's in a situation where we would normally expect them to feel depressed, like they've just experienced a bereavement, so someone very close to them has died, they will often talk about their experience in terms of these physical kinds of phenomena. So I don't think we know if living in a more developed country makes people more likely to have dysfunctional forms of distress. We do know that I think that it's more likely for them to present with that distress in the way that is described by depression as we understand it. I don't know. What do you think, Lea?
We'll take a question from the audience. Someone got a microphone?
That not necessarily it's connected with the information that people have. So I was wondering from your talk, how can we address these biological changes so we can achieve real changes in people's life? And the way I think it connects with Professor Lea's talk, and that's something I want to ask her, is I totally agree with teaching well-being at schools, but the trap I see there is falling into the dualistic thing about you have to be happy, being sad is not good, and especially coming from people that might not be, because we expect teachers to be teaching that. And as a psychologist, you had a long journey probably to develop new understandings about this. And connecting with the neurobiology change, I expect things to happen the same way, and no matter this discussion, they will then end up falling into the dualistic thing. So I want to know from your experience if that actually happens in those curriculums.
So just to bring it to a question, then what's your question?
That was the question, sorry. I want to know if with this well-being teaching, these dualistic things end up happening where being happy is good and being sad is not good.
Lea, do you want to take that?
Oh, sure. Great question. Thank you very much. In any discipline area that we teach, we run the risk of dumbing it down and oversimplifying it and making it become sort of binomial. So it's either this or it's that. I think that if we are starting to work through the systems in teaching teachers how to teach wellbeing, that was teaching teachers how to teach wellbeing, that we need to make sure that when that curriculum is developed for the teachers before they go on to teach it to the children. How many times have I just said the word teach? I'm not quite sure, but it was a lot. We need to make sure that we do that in a very mature and sophisticated way so that we don't run the risk of having a discourse where happiness is the desired state and we're trying to move away from unhappiness. And actually a lot of what positive psychology is interested in studying is this notion of resilience. What are the positive processes that allow us to overcome challenges in our life? So in order for us to understand the positive processes, and that might be the ability for us or young children to cultivate their own positive emotions, have a sense of what their own character strengths are so they can navigate their way through. So these are all things in the happy camp: positive emotions, character strengths, positive relationships, a sense of meaning. But we can't understand that happiness camp unless we actually understand the adversity that the person has gone through in the first place. So it's not an either or, it's an and both. And we need to make sure in the curriculum that we're not privileging happiness over sadness, because actually the truth is that we can't avoid sadness and loss and challenge and adversity in our life, and nor should we, because often, you know, it's always darkest before the dawn. It's challenges in our life. If we're taught these skills beforehand and we come into the challenge with a psychological toolkit, that's how we develop our resilience in the first place. And if we have teachers who don't tell us that the end point, the goalpost is happiness, the goalpost is meaning. The goalpost is a sense that I can achieve and I can manage and balance my way through life's adversities and still be a person who has meaning and happiness and does well in the world. So it's about languaging it, so it's a much richer story than just teaching a happiness curriculum where happiness is the end point.
I'm sorry, we're already over time, so I'm so sorry about this. We only have time for one more question. The microphone's over here. Yeah.
Hi. You mentioned, Professor Physics, you mentioned that school curriculum doesn't teach physics and chemistry till a certain age. But I want to just quickly share some knowledge with you and then ask you about your opinion. I come from one institution that does that, from another part of the world, from Europe. And we do that from early age, and our results are, we're officially the best school in the mathematics in the world. We won the most, the greatest number of medals in the world in international mathematical Olympiads and physics. So if you just
what school is that?
Mathematical Gymnasium Belgrade. You can find it on Wikipedia. It has more than 400 medals, and our student. Yeah, well, our student is #1 in the Hall of Fame of International Mathematical Olympiads, for example, and we won the greatest number of scholarships from Cambridge, Oxford, etc., etc. Our students went to Oxford at the age of 15. So,
could you meet after the session, please? I'd like to speak to you.
Yeah, of course. So I've been in that school and as a student and as a teacher. So I just wanted to tell you that there are experiences. I'm just saying this because you said no one does that in the world. So there is big data. This school exists for 50 years, and it's currently officially the best school in mathematics and physics in the world.
It's a rare beast, I think, your school, though. Yeah. Most curriculum, if you look at the American, United Kingdom, Singapore, wherever Australia, it's excluded from...
Yeah, Americans come regularly to us to copy something. But But having said that,
we've got to really rush this on. I'm sorry.
But having said that, I want to ask you of something else. Did you hear of Benezet? He made an experiment in 1930s where kids didn't actually learn any mathematics till their 6th grade. So they were just reading books and discussing things. And at 6th grade, they started learning maths, and in 4 months, they were better than their peers who actually did learn mathematics. So that's another argument that's counter.
So we shouldn't teach maths to kids.
No. So just there are things that people can discuss about this, and I could talk more and more. But
I'm sorry.
So what's your opinion on one or the other?
I'm sorry. I will have to take Tony Jones on you, get all Tony Jones on you, and say that we'll have to take those as a comment because we're way over time already. I'm so sorry about that.
The point of that all of these things, there is a developmental readiness to it, right? The developmental readiness to learning science, to learning well-being, to learning self-regulation. But the earlier intervention approaches are what the research is now telling us is the most successful.
Time to vote, ladies and time to vote. I'm getting this sign very heavily. Time to vote, ladies and gentlemen, on the proposition. Go right ahead. We've had the voting. We're finished. Okay. There we go. Lee's the one. Lee's won, I think. So congratulations, Lee.